was how the Vatican Church, back in the 1980s, I believe, Shalom, Shavua Tov, have a good week, and we'll see you next week or the week after, state to all of the renegade Protestant churches back to Rome. And that was it used to be called Vatican II. And you can Google and research that. And part of their strategy was to influence, and this is the Jesuit influence, to influence the charismatic movement, to stimulate the body through use of music and song, basically playing the psychological gameplay to bring the church into a place of spiritual worship, but not based on truth, based on experience, emotion, and sensuality. And that would incorporate not only the church, but the masses of the world. All the New Age religions would be incorporated into this plan. So we see here many churches, just like Bethel Church, which spans the globe, their experiential form of worship, where they have centers, experiential centers, where your worship and your prayer will be to tap into the vibrational elements of the world, your vibrational frequencies, in order to have a higher and enlightened spiritual encounter and experience. Again, it's all about feeling, emotionalism, as opposed to sound, truth, and the Word of God. So here we have the Vatican charismatic agenda explained. In the 1960s, before many of you were born in this room, before I was born, in the 1960s, the Pentecostal Church still regarded Roman Catholicism as suspicion. However, by 1965, Reverend Erwin Prang wrote, "Recently, I attended a Roman Catholic, Episcopalian, and Lutheran retreat. I am convinced that the basic meaning of the charismatic renewal is the reunion of the churches." In May 1975, Pope Paul VI spoke at the International Conference on the Catholic Charismatic Renewal, encouraging attendees to find renewal and to remain anchored in the church. So experience what you're experiencing, but stay anchored in the church. Nothing is more necessary to this more and more secularized world than the witness of the spiritual renewal that we see. The Holy Spirit, that we see the Holy Spirit evoking in the most diverse regions and below. How then could this spiritual renewal not be a chance for the church and for the world? And how, in this case, could one not take all the means to ensure that it remains so? So it's that same old principle. If you can't beat them, join them. The Vatican II Council issued recommendations on liturgy, so they even get involved in the literature and the liturgy in the services that are written. The singing, prayers, congregational responses, and scripture reading that make up a church service. These directives discuss ways to incorporate the whole church community in the service, making them more involved in worship procedures. Churches were encouraged to shift away from traditional sermons that exhort and equip, and instead concentrate on the cursory reading of extracts from the Psalms. So just randomly reading text. No purpose, no direction, no expoling, no exegetical research of it, just random picking of text. So, they were instructed to replace traditional hymns with popular music, modern musical instruments, and physical movement of the congregation. Churches were also encouraged to adapt their styles of worship to suit their cultures. The liturgical section of the Vatican II document, Volume 1, can be summarized as follows. Point 1. Get the churches accustomed to celebration terminology and the celebration concept. Every function of the church becomes a celebration. Get the churches, point 2, get the churches accustomed to a revitalized style of celebration service, encouraging a reduction of inhibition. Just let go. Whatever you feel, just go with it. Don't question it. Don't find a scripture for it. Just make yourself open. which includes physical gestures, bodily attitudes, and movement. Point 3, set forth song and musical celebration services as the most effective celebrations. Point 4, utilizing popular religious songs and relating music to the various cultures and the temperaments of the people. If any of you ever researched anything called MK Ultra, mind control programs, when you read the documentation, this is exactly how they read. How do you manipulate people? You tap into their normal way of life, and everything they do, you analyze it and you manipulate it and you twist it. You work through those avenues to control them. So, for example, something as very basic as television is the most powerful tool they have, and they have utilized it, and they have worked it, and they control billions through it. In fact, they funded the finance of television to get it off the ground because they realized this is how we can get into your homes to control you. The next step was, we want to be able to track you down and know your every movement. We want to know your conversations. We want to know your thoughts. We'll invent something called a mobile phone. That will never take off. Everyone having a mobile phone? Oh, it did. And now we all have bugged ourselves. We are being recorded every second of the day. And it's unlimited power and research they have. They probably know you better than you think you know yourself. Because they analyze your trends, your conversations are all analyzed. Facebook was funded by the CIA. Okay? It wasn't some kid in the back room writing a computer program that done it, so we can really they funded that. And they helped him to get where he was because it served the agenda. He's just a front man. Anyway, that's all basic mind control techniques. This is what this is. This is mind control, but within the church. Mind control through your church services. Things that have always been here all along, hymnals and Bibles, they manipulate through that. Talking about experiential religion again. The instructions on music in the liturgy. So music is very key, and the type of music that is played is very key. This was actually in the Vatican II document. Quote, the unity of hearts is more profoundly achieved by the union of voices. Minds are more easily raised to heavenly things by the beauty of sacred rites. Call it sacraments even. In order that the faithful may actively participate more willingly and with greater benefit, it is fitting that the format of the celebration and the degree of participation in it should be varied as much as possible according to the solemnity of the day and the nature of the congregation present. The participation should be above all internal, must be, on the other hand, external also. That is, such as to show the internal participation by gestures and bodily attitudes, by acclamations, responses, and singing. Vatican II again issued directives on what is important in the church services, liturgy, music, and activities, so that church became a place people went to in order to have an experience. People are going to church nowadays for experiences, not so much to know the truth, but just have an experience. Ooh, that felt awesome, and go home. Their suspicions of Rome diminishing and forgetting the Reformation, Protestant churches listened now under the new ecumenical spirit. They allowed Rome to issue recommendations based not on the straight preaching and teaching of the word, but on feelings and experiences. This experiential religion became known as the charismatic movement. But in order for this to work, they would have to have all the heads of the charismatic movement. And I showed you before, all the heads have come to Rome. Kenneth Copeland and all of the leading heads, Joel Osteen, all of them, have all come under Vatican II's control, which is Jesuit control. Now, how do we see those heads teaching the churches? I'm talking billions of members. All of what I've just read, this whole falling out in the spirit, the laughing in the spirit, the utterances, the ecstasy, the frenzy, everything we've just read, these leaders are now just the pawns of the Jesuit control of Vatican. We're told in scriptures to to know and to follow the 7 feasts of Yahweh, the spring feast and the fall feast, the autumn feast. We're now in the autumn season, we're now in the fall. The trumpet is just around the corner. We were taught these were our celebrations. These were our feasts. These were our times of joyful merrymaking, especially culminating in Sukkot, where it's a commandment to be joyful. These were our times of celebration. But now, the Vatican has seen to it that the Day of the Sun replaces the biblical feast, and now they're turning Sunday services into a weekly celebration. And that is what you will find more and more of these churches are trying to make Sunday a day of celebration. So now, instead of the truth of the word and the feast of Yahweh, which are holy and sanctified, now we have this name Jesus. And everyone is just worshiping Jesus without realizing the word Jesus actually means hailed from Zeus. And if you don't believe me, you can understand when the Greeks would name their children, they would suffix the name with us at the end to denote that this firstborn child especially is a child of Zeus. So we have names like Apollos, names like Perseus, all ending with us to denote a child, a son that comes from Zeus. People argue this because when they study Greek, they think, well, that doesn't mean that. It's not. Isus does not mean one who hails from Zeus. But you have to study the culture. When you understand Greek culture, then you understand how the us at the end denotes one who comes from Zeus. Because Greeks believe that all children come from the God, the Father God, who was Zeus. So please, look beyond the etymological study, but study cultural studies as well to understand how this name Jesus, Jesus, means one who hails from Zeus. So instead of celebrations of Yahweh, now the church has its own celebrations, its own holidays, Easter replacing the true Passover, and now we have Sunday as opposed to Shabbat as a weekly celebration. And more churches are being moved from places where you would learn the word to places where you go for a worship experience, to feel good, to lift up your hands. And yes, it's wonderful to have a great worship song. I love that as a worship leader myself. But when that becomes the center, the central purpose for us being here, something is off. Where we now have a generation that only comes to church just for the worship service and for the experience that goes along with that, and pretty much not much else. Now, most churches look like concert halls. And many people know Hillsong. Hillsong is more famous for its music than for its actual teaching by its pastor. So, the church in its decay on one side is building on another side. It's all about worship, 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 worship. And worship, to me, is not just singing a song. Worship is a lifestyle, not just something that you do in a church service. But let's move on. I said before that I will take you back at least 300-400 years. But I said before that, I will take you back 4,000, even 6,000 years. So to keep true to my promise, let's take a look at the ancient Sumerian culture, where we'll find secret mystery religions and their priesthoods, in order to find where did this babbling of tongues and this speaking another tongue really originate. And this is way before the charismatic era. We're going back to ancient Sumeria, which is before ancient Babylon. In your Bible, you'll be familiar with a city called Ur of the Chaldees. This is in the same area of that Sumerian area. And there is where the Magi originate as well. We get the word magic from. Ur was known to be a center of not just commerce, but a center of knowledge of all things, especially spiritual things. It was this very building that Saddam Hussein had rebuilt in Iraq, and it's still there to this very day. But the Babylonian priests, which I won't go too much into, the Babylonian priests, they knew all the ancient arts, the ancient witches, they were ancient warlocks. They knew the incantations and spells that many secret societies search after and indeed do have to this very day. It was those same Babylonian priests that moved over into the great empire Egypt, which is actually known as Kemet. These Babylonian priests were assimilated into the land of Kemet with all of their secret knowledge and dark arts. To read just how powerful they were, when you read in the book of Exodus, and Moshe comes into the land with the rod of God, the rod of Yah, and he actually performs these wonderful miracles, guess what? We have two characters that are named to us in the book of New Testament by Shaul as Jannes and Jambres, or Jannes and Jambres. And these are two magicians who had the power to be able to duplicate the first three miracles of Moshe. So they knew real power. They knew how to access real power in those days. The education of the Egyptian priests consisted also in the specialization of magic. According to the historian Herodotus, the Egyptian priests possessed supernatural powers, for they had been trained in the esoteric philosophy of the greater mysteries and were experts in magic. They had the power of controlling the minds of men. Hypnosis, we call it. The power of predicting the future. This is by the historian now. This is not me. They have the power of predicting the future, prophecy, and the power over nature. In other words, the power of the gods. By giving commands in the name of the divinity, something that the rabbis speak a lot about, and accomplishing great deeds. This is what the historian writes. Herodotus also tells us that the most celebrated oracles of the ancient world were located in the land of Kemet. Hercules, or Hercules, or at Canopus, Apollo at Apollinopolis, Magma, Minerva at Sais, Diana at Barbastis, Mars at Caprimus, and Jupiter at Thebes and Ammonium. And that the Greek oracles Delphi, Oracle of Delphi, were Egyptian imitations. These names are the names of the great sages and magicians and warlocks of the past. And he says here that the Greek Oracle of Delphi, which is known all over the world, was only an imitation of the ones in Egypt. That says a lot, actually. This is what we read about in the Bible, where Israel's kings began to imitate the ways of the heathen. And the gods and the way they worship their gods, Israel's kings began to mimic, because it was actually accessing real demonic power. There are three things I was warned that you've got to master as a man, as a minister. You've got to discipline yourself in the area of power, money, and women. Those are the three things that every man needs to be able to master in his life, because those are the three ways the enemy will come in and control and manipulate you. And for the women, same thing. Money, power, and men. You've got to become strong, you've got to become mature, you've got to become responsible in the way that you control yourself in those three areas. But Israel's kings would always fall prey to those areas. How many times do we see the kings or judges, mighty men of Israel, falling in the area of women? Falling in the area of power. They become power drunk. And access to power is unlimited if you go into the demonic realm, hence why the kings of Israel began to sacrifice their own firstborn. Literally, a king of Israel sacrificed his firstborn son just to do what? To consecrate some gates? To consecrate some gates? You kill your own child? It doesn't make sense to you understand they weren't ordinary gates. You heard me talk about gateways to the gods. Okay? Jericho was rebuilt at the cost of firstborn blood, because gates serve more than just opening up to the natural realm. They also open up to the spiritual realm. But let me not wander off course. So Israel incurred much sin by sacrificing children. And in fact, there's a place called, I'm trying to remember the place, you can see it. It's called Balaam, but it has another name. It's the place where Yeshua visited with his disciples after his experience in the Mount of Transfiguration. It's It's at the base of the mountain. It's like a huge open cave. And that was the place where thousands of babies were thrown in. It was called the gateway to hell, basically. And they would throw their firstborn, not just firstborn, they would throw their babies in there as offerings to the gods. But this place has a very long history, and Yeshua taught his disciples about this place. It's in the scripture. It'll come to me later on. But anyway, the Temple of Delphi was where the Oracle of Delphi resided. And this, for the Western world, was one of the biggest known prophets, or one of the most famous prophetesses in the Western world. This is all pre-Yeshua, hundreds of years before Yeshua, in fact maybe a few thousand. The Oracle of Delphi was sought after by all of antiquity's famous names. Alexander the Great went to see the Oracle of Delphi, and I believe Napoleon went to see the Oracle of Delphi as well. The Oracle of Delphi, the Muses, and the Muses wrote spirits, goddesses of the inspiration of literature. And Shakespeare writes about having muses help him to write his literature, his sonnets. They were goddesses of inspiration of literature over the arts, science, and music, and song and lyrics. The Pythia, commonly known as the Oracle of Delphi. Pythia sounds very similar, it is. Python. Remember I taught in the previous teachings about Python spirit? Pythia, commonly known as the Oracle of Delphi, that tells you about her, was the name of any priestess throughout the history of the Temple of Apollo in Delphi, which was located at the slopes of Mount Parnassus, beneath the Castalian Spring, on the north shore of the Corinthian Gulf in Greece. Each new priestess was selected after the death of the current priestess and after the legendary death of a man. So there was a man to begin with. Once he died, he was replaced by priestesses. Those of you who watched the film 300 at the very beginning, this is the same scene, with Leonidas climbs the mountain to go see the oracles, and they speak to the oracle. See, that's the Oracle of Delphi. It was always a woman after that man who surrendered her name and position upon becoming the oracle. The Pythia, established in the 8th century BC, so 800 years before Yeshua, was widely credited for her prophecies inspired by being filled by the Spirit of God. Here's this, filled by the Spirit again. Or ethnusios, which is what we get the word for enthusiasm or enthusiastic, comes from this Greek word. Most of our English words are actually Greek words. In this case, Apollo. So she would become possessed with the spirit of Apollo, lower in the voodoo, remember? She'd become possessed with the spirit of Apollo, and therefore she'd be able to speak through a Pythia serpent spirit. That's how she would be able to speak. The Delphic oracle may have been present in some form in late Mycenaean times from 1400 BC. So forget 800 BC. The Oracle of Delphi goes back 2,000 years before Yeshua and was abandoned, and there is evidence that Apollo took over the shrine from an earlier dedication to Gaia. Have you ever heard of the Gaia spirit? And last recorded response of the oracle was given about 395 AD. Verification needed on that. To Emperor Theodosius I, after he had ordered pagan temples to cease operation. Let's take a look at this word, enthusiasmos. Following the torches, this is the quote I think, following the torches as they dipped and swayed in the darkness, they climbed the mountain paths. Remember the film 300, Leonidas climbing the mountain? They climbed the mountain paths and head thrown back and eyes glazed, dancing to the beat of the drum. Remember the voodoo rituals we talked about before? Which stirred their blood, or staggered drunkenly with what was known as the Dionysus Gate. In other words, they drunk themselves into a drunken stupor. That's why we have a bar in the middle of town called Bacchus. Bacchus is the word for Dionysus, the god of wine, the Roman god of wine. In this state of ecstasis or ecstasy, or I hate saying this word, enthusiasmos, they abandoned themselves to dancing wildly and shouting, "You I," the God's name. And at that moment of intense rapture, became identified with the God himself. They became filled with his spirit and acquired divine powers. I'm reading different literature from different periods of time, but if you've been following me from last week, it's the same language, even in the church. Same language in voodoo. It's the same literature. They get empowered with a divine being when they give themselves over to drink and the excess of that, to becoming wild and in a frenzy. They become endued with the power of the gods. But I talked about in South America, the New Age movement are flying in the thousands to South America to take part in, I think it's called ayahuasca ceremonies, where they drink the potion to have out-of-body experiences, where they are filled with the power of Quetzalcoatl or other South American gods. During this period, the Delphic oracle was the most prestigious and authoritative oracle among the Greeks, and she was without doubt the most powerful woman of the classical world. The oracle is one of the best documented religious institutions of the classical Greeks. Authors who mention the oracle include, I'm not going to try and say these Greek names, my tongue will just fall out my mouth, but Aristotle we know, Clement of Alexandria we know, Diodorus and many others, as you can see listed. The name Pythia is derived from Pytho, which in myth was the original name of Delphi. In etymology, the Greeks derived this place name from the verb pathein, to mean to rot. Rotting of what? Which refers to the sickly sweet smell of the decomposition of the body of the monstrous Python after he was slain by Apollo. So Pythia was the house of snakes. The usual theory has been that Pythia delivered oracles in a frenzied state induced by the vapors rising from the chasm in the rock, and that she spoke gibberish which priests interpreted as the enigmatic prophecies preserved in Greek literature. So the same spirit that possessed the oracle of Delphi, this Python spirit, this Pythia, is it possible it's in the church? The same certain spirit. Is that even biblical? Jumping ahead. The 8th century reformulation of the oracle of Delphi is a shrine to Apollo, seems associated with the rise and importance of the city of Corinth and the importance of the sites in the Corinthian Gulf. You must have picked up that word and I read it before. So the issues we're having in the church of Corinth that Paul is trying to deal with, he's dealing with people who come out of oracle of Delphi worship. They're servants to Aphrodite. It is the culture to be into all of these Greek pagan gods. So Paul is actually dealing with a multitude of different Greek dialects being spoken in one place. He's dealing with a city that has 1,000 women as temple prostitutes who, by the way, go to church as well. So when he's saying women should not be dressed in such manner and gold and fancy hair, they were hookers. But they also went to church as well. And the way you served Aphrodite was you would sleep with men, take the money, and build the temple with them. This is the problem that Paul is dealing with, and in amongst all that, we also had Hebrew speakers as well. When I went through last week, the different types of Greek that was spoken in Corinth and in that church. So is it possible that the same Pythia spirit that is in all of these people, in this oracle, is that what was going on in biblical times? Let's take a look at this Pythia, this oracle of Delphi. Acts chapter 16, verse 16 through to 18. Once when we were going to the place where the Minyan gathered, that's a gathering of 10 saints, gathered, we were met by a slave girl who had in her a snake spirit. And the Greek word is Pythia, or Pythion, in your Bible. That enabled her to predict the future. But isn't that what the historian also said that they did? So the Bible is confirming what the historian said. She earned a lot of money for her owners by telling fortunes. This girl followed behind Shaul and the rest of us and kept screaming, these men are the servants of God, God Most High. They're telling you how to be saved. She kept this up day after day until Shaul, greatly disturbed, turned and said to the spirit, in the name of Yeshua, the Messiah, I order you to come out of her. And the spirit did come out at that very moment. So the Bible records a young girl who was a priestess, an oracle of Delphi. She was a priestess to Apollo. This is very common in the ancient Greek world. Another very powerful and prolific priestess was the oracle of Sybil. Many of you back in the Soul days remember a singer called Sybil. The Sybil was frenzied, and this is a quote, a Sybil with frenzied mouth, again the babblings, just like what we see now in Pentecostal churches. Sybil with frenzied mouth, uttering things not to be laughed at, unadorned and unperfumed, yet reaches to 1,000 years with her voice by aid of the god. Walter Burkett observes that frenzied women from whose lips the God speaks are recorded much, much earlier in the Near East, as in Mari in the 2nd millennium, and in Assyria in the 1st millennium. We're getting close to the end of the presentation. I just want to share a few quotes from some of the writers that I've come across in my research. And these guys are leading authorities in their work. Unintelligible babbling, known as speaking in tongues, in the modern Pentecostal movement is widely practiced in cults and even in non-Christian and pagan religions. Richard Gans, in the 20 Controversies That Almost Killed the Church, says that this kind of babbling is practiced by Mormons, the way international Hindus, Muslims, and many others. The Way International is actually a church just around the corner from here, actually, just literally, just in Paraguay. But this practice is not only a recent phenomenon, but was common in pagan worship long before Christ came. That's Robert G. Gramacki in the Modern Tongues Movement, page 5. Some of these ecstatic babblings were reported by the report of Winneman in 1100 BC. It was recorded by Plato's Dialogues as well in the 5th century BC. The Greco-Roman mystery religions before and after the Christian era most probably practiced these babbling utterances. Quote, suddenly one of them, Chrysoc, went out of his head, unable to contain himself in the regular rhythm of the service. He leapt to his feet, crying like a raven, howling like a wolf. In ecstasy, he and the girl, Ivalu, began to yell in a tongue I could not understand. Certainly, it was not the usual Eskimo language, and if there is such a thing as speaking in tongues, I heard it then. Ecstatic language was a common form of worship in pagan temples. It was established in ancient Byblos, ancient Babylon and ancient Egypt, in the 1st millennium BC. Plato mentions it is a phenomenon in his time, so even then in his time it was a phenomenon. He tells us that a person under divine possession received utterances and visions that the receiver did not understand. But what kind of divine possession? These utterances were sometimes accompanied by the spiritual healing of people present. This is written by Virgil, 70 BC. Tells us that the Sibylline priestess, when in prayer, united her spirit with the god Apollo and spoke in strange tongues. So when people say, I speak in tongues so that demons can't understand, they're deceived. Because we know, historians have recorded this, that demons, where do they come from? They come from heaven. It's logical that they would understand every language not known to man and every language known to man. So even demons can make you speak in an unknown language. Even demons can perform healing. And if you take that as a sign of authentic worship that God is here, you will be easily deceived. The Bible tells us Antichrist will come and he will perform many miracles. And it says the whole world will go after him because he looks authentic. But how do we know he's not authentic? The Bible tells you the key. He teaches lawlessness. He teaches without teaching to the law. He doesn't lead you to the law, to the Torah, to the instruction of the Most High. Just a few closing words and we're done. From the forefathers. Because the forefathers had a lot to say. Again, this is not about denomination or dispensation. These are the forefathers who varied themselves in their own beliefs. We have Luther, Calvin, and Wesley. The proponents of Reformation believed that tongues were known languages. Luther says, referred to tongues as the ability to translate one known language into another. The forefathers believed is clear. After Pentecost, the concept of speaking in tongues was also present throughout the early church period. Irenaeus, in his work Against Heresy, speaks out against the abuse of the prophetic gift that often led to violent emotions and loss of chastity, which we saw in Corinthians. Again, Paul writes, there is such sexual immorality going on there of the likes I've never heard of anywhere else. It's interesting, that was the place where languages was out of control. And that was real languages. In early times, the gift of tongues, or languages as we learned before, was regarded as the ability to speak languages with which to communicate the good news, the gospel. See what the Apostle Paul had to say about spiritual gifts in his letter to the Corinthian church. Writing of Paul's gift of tongues, mentioned in 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 18, clearly refers to the gift as the ability to speak a known language for the purpose of preaching the gospel. But when we see people speaking in tongues in the church, it's not for communicating the gospel, it's for ecstatic, frenzied worship. Not for teaching, not for edification. Concluding, just a few more slides and we're going to be done. I know you've been very, very patient. I'm looking at the slides. That's more than a few. I'll try and condense it because I know it's quite lengthy. I think what I'll do is I'll record the rest for the camera. So at least it's there for posterity's sake. Greek gods. We've touched a bit about how they will become possessed by the gods. We've looked at in voodoo culture, the voodoo priests say that fallen angels are what inhabits them in the lowlands. It's the same for every culture. Gods became patrons of cities. So even Westminster Palace in London and St. Paul's Cathedral in London are actually built on temples to Greek gods. Every organization, when I say the House of Parliament in London, is built on top of an ancient temple. So this whole country has patron Greek gods at the very foundations of every building of government. Aphrodite for Corinth, goddess of love and beauty and sexuality, hence why we read what we read in Corinthians. Helios for the roads, and we're called upon for help in particular situations. For example, Ares during war, Hera for weddings. Some gods were imported from abroad. For example, Adonis, Adonai, Greeks, Adonis, and incorporated into the Greek pantheon, while rivers and springs could take on a very localized, personified form, such as the nymphs. And I'll touch on this because I have done a teaching on this. The muses, or the nymphs, which were spirits around waterways, is where we have the word grace come from. Because it's not just grace, it's the graces. The graces were daughters of Zeus. So when we use this word grace, we don't realize it's all going back to worshiping of the daughters of Zeus. Christianity is so permeated with pagan gods that we don't even know what we're reading anymore. Or we're just in ignorance and just worshiping. So the word for grace in Hebrew is chesed, which means favor. But we were given this name, grace. It's a woman. It's a woman. They're the graces. You can go to the Greek museum, you can see the graces. The three daughters of Zeus, which they call the nymphs. And you know what we use the word nymph for. It always goes back to sexuality. The mystery orders of ancient Egypt's priests, the Egyptian priesthood, which we talked about a bit before, it would appear that there were two forms of writing in use among the Egyptians. The Domitic, believed to have been introduced by Pharaoh for trade and for commercial purposes, and the hieroglyphics that you're familiar with, of which there were two forms of the hieroglyphics. Hieroglyphics proper and hieroglyphics hieratic. A linear form, both of which were used only by the priests in order to conceal the secret and mystical powers and meanings of their doctrines. We were also informed that the mystery system of Egypt employed modes of spoken language which could be understood only by the initiated. These consisted not only of myths and parables, but also of secret language called Senzar. That secret language of Senzar is what is believed that certain secret societies have learned in order to manifest the power that Janus and Jambres demonstrated. Are you following me so far? So they were able to work these miracles, and the ancient language at the time for the priesthood, the secret language was called Senzar. We also understand that the Egyptians attached numerical values, both to letters and to words. The rabbis do that. Gematria is the attaching to letters numerical values. This they got from the Egyptians. So the Egyptians attached numerical values both to letters and to words, and to geometrical figures, with the same intention as with the use of hieroglyphics. In other words, to conceal their teachings. It is further understood that the Egyptian numerical and geometrical symbolism were contained in the 42 books of Hermes, whose system was the oldest and most elaborate repository of mathematical symbolism in the world. Again, we are reminded of the source of the number philosophy of Pythagoras. The education of the Egyptian priests consisted also of the specialization of magic. I think I read this part out before. You have to skip this. Here it might be well to mention that the Egyptian priests were the first genuine priests of history who exercised control over the laws of nature. I said before, the Babylonian priests went into the Egyptian priesthood. They exercised control over the laws of nature. Here it might also be well to mention that the Egyptian Book of the Dead is a book of magical formulae and instructions intended to direct the fate of a departed soul. It was the prayer book of the mystery system of Egypt, and the Egyptian priesthood received training in post-mortem conditions and the methods of their verification. It must also be noted that magic was applied religion or primitive scientific method. This one, I like this slide. The word abracadabra. We're all familiar with that. The word abracadabra, or Ibra Kedibra, may derive from an Aramaic phrase meaning I create like the word. In Hebrew, it means it came to pass as it was spoken. The first known mention of the word was in the 3rd century AD in a book called Liber Medicinalis by Quintus Cyrillus Simonicus, physician to the Roman Emperor Caligula, who in chapter 51 prescribed that malaria sufferers wear an amulet containing the word written in the form of a triangle. Wonder that's why Freemasons have triangles everywhere. Alistair Crowley said that the most evil man in history regarded it as possessing great power. He said its true form is abracadabra. This, worn as an amulet, would enlist the power of spirits to ward off sicknesses. This was used widely in London. J.K. Rowling, the writer of all the Harry Potter series, acknowledged, quote, "It is an ancient spell in Aramaic. So I used it in my books and made it mine as a destroying incantation." Wow. It's not just harmless books. It's a way to control a generation. This is a quote from Benny Hinn, the international evangelist. Hinn further reported that the sisters gave several words of prophecy. He met with Catholic nuns, and I think he goes on to tell the history of what he did here. The sisters gave several words of prophecy that encouraged me. After this, Hinn wrote, quote, "By then I was on my knees crying because I sensed such a tremendous presence of the Lord. Then it was an anointing that I had never experienced in a communion service, not even in my own church. It was a divine, powerful presence of God that I can't describe, except to say Jesus walked into that little room. As I was kneeling and praising the Lord, with my hands extended directly in front of me, the Mother General put the wafer in my mouth." That's the Eucharist. "At that moment, I felt a fire literally go through me, and as that took place, something else amazing happened. I sensed on the tip of my fingers something like a robe, a soft, silky fabric. He went on to explain that he felt a physical body within the robe, which he said he believed was actually the body of Christ. Hinn's actual words, I believe I was literally kneeling at the feet of Jesus. It is difficult to understand how any believer could be so blinded by the errors of Romanism, yet Hinn, Benny Hinn, who is one of the biggest names in global Christianity, in Benny Hinn's book, has a commendatory foreword by Jack Hayford and by Paul Crouch, they own the biggest TV stations, who is offering the blood as a special inducement for TBN contributions. How can you offer the blood to anybody as a special for TBN contribution? Hinn and his supporters are deceiving and being deceived. Hinn is empowered by a false spirit, not the Holy Spirit. Be sure to carefully read Matthew 7, 25-23, and see all of his deceptions, if possible, or is possible. And this is one of the biggest names in Christianity who's brought millions of people to the altar, and they've given their lives to Yeshua, but they've learned from him, and his doctrine and teachings are in them. This is some research by a linguistic specialist. William J. Samarin is a big name in linguistical analysis. In 1972, William J. Samarin, a linguist from the University of Toronto, published a thorough assessment of Pentecostal glossolalia that became a classic work. I know it's lengthy, guys, but I'm just getting this recorded. Became a classic work on its linguistic characteristics. His assessment was based on a large sample of glossolalia recorded in public and private Christian meetings in Italy, Netherlands, Jamaica, Canada, the USA, over the course of 5 years. His wide range included the Puerto Ricans of the Bronx, the snake handlers of the Appalachians, and the spiritual Christians from Russia, Los Angeles. Samarin found that glossolalia speech does resemble human language in some respects. The speaker uses accent, rhythm, intonation, pauses to break up the speech into distinct units. Each unit in itself is made up of symbols, the symbols being formed from consonants and vowels taken from a language known to the speaker. It is a verbal behavior that consists of using a certain number of consonants and vowels, they've got it broken down to a fine science, in a limited number of syllables that in turn are organized into larger units that are taken apart and rearranged pseudogrammatically with variations in pitch, volume, speed, and intensity. In other words, it's simple. They're just faking it. That's all it is. They're just faking it. Glossolalia consists of strings of syllables made up of sounds taken from all of those that the speaker knows already, put together more or less haphazardly, but emerging nonetheless as word-like and sentence-like units because of realistic language-like rhythm. In other words, Babashanda Kilalanda, Stilmahanda, Okalabashanda, Coca-Cola. Somebody Stilmahanda, someone stole Mahanda. It's just words. Shimishanda. It's just a word you already know, but you're just rephrasing it and breaking it up to sound like something that we don't know, but it's just words you already use. Shandibasa. Lo cosendo. Rabina! Oh, Rabina! That the sounds are taken from a set of sounds already known to the speaker is confirmed by others. Felicitas Goodman, a psychological anthropologist and linguist, also found that the speech of glossalists reflected the patterns of speech to the speaker's native language. So wherever they went in the world, it was just the same thing, but in their own languages, in their own culture. That's all it is. That's all it is. Samarin found the resemblance of human language was merely on the surface, and so concluded that glossolalia is only a facade of language. These are language specialists of every language around the world. He reached this conclusion because the syllable string did not form words. The stream of speech was not internally organized, and most importantly of all, there was no systematic relationship between units of speech and concepts. Humans use language to communicate, but glossolalia does not. Therefore, he concluded that glossolalia, which is what it's called in church, what you see in this babbling of tongues, is not a specimen of human language because it is neither internally organized nor systematically related to the world man perceives. Or, on the basis of his linguistic analysis, Samarin defined Pentecostal glossolalia is meaningless, but phonologically structured human utterance, believed by the speaker to be a real language, but bearing no systematic resemblance to any natural language, living or dead. Practitioners of glossolalia may disagree, which they will, with linguistic researchers, and claim that they are speaking human languages, xenoglossolalia that's called. But Ms. Goodman studied a number of Pentecostal communities in the United States, the Caribbean, Mexico. These included English, Spanish, and even Mayan culture speaking groups. She compared what she found with recordings of non-Christian rituals from Africa, Borneo, Indonesia, Japan. She took into account both the segmental structure, such as sounds, syllables, phrases, and the segmental elements, rhythm, accent, intonation, and concluded that there was no distinction between what was practiced by the Pentecostal Protestants and the followers of other religions. There's no difference. There's no difference. Is this something that the church should be practicing? If there's no difference between the church and the pagans? It tells me that the spirit of Apollo, the spirit of Apollyon, is in the church. He's in the believers. And they don't know the difference between the truth and the fake.
Well, sorry. Didn't you say that Satan had already infiltrated the churches a long time ago? And the reason that is because just the name alone, God, that does not belong to Yahweh. This is why you know Satan is in the church, because they're worshipping God. That is not Yahweh's name. That is Satan's name. Before that, it was Zeus. Before that, it was Saturn. So.
And then he went one step further, and this will be contentious. Instead it was God who gave them Jesus. That was one step closer now to actually a unique name. And if you go and speak to, I said in parts 1 and 2, you speak to the Spanish, and they will say, Jesus. They say, Jesus is how it's pronounced, which directly means hails from Zeus. So there's no argument with me on that point. But you'll still argue, because it's what the church says. So the church can't be wrong, can it? So we've kind of I mean, I can make the presentation available to anyone. It is a bit more from the linguistical analytical side, which is very, very good. But we can skip through some of that, but it is available in the presentation for all of you that love this stuff. Yeah, we'll skip through. We can skip through this. Yeah, that pretty much concludes it. So thank you very much for your time, and thank you for coming to support the recording of this. And I just encourage you that just keep studying your Bibles and study and read. The Bible says, study to show thyself approved unto Yahweh. The workman will not need to be ashamed. When you study and you get to the core, the foundation, you will have that confidence that you're standing on the truth. But the shame of it is, the church stopped reading. The church stopped studying. They'd rather have a worship service, and the pastor will tell us what to believe, and we won't question it anymore. We won't question it. And that is how we deceive the people. Thank you very much. Thank you here very long. Thank you for your patience. I know it was hard to sit still so long. I hope it was interesting. I hope it was gripping. I will get the video edited and get it up on the internet so you can post it out to your friends.